Amazing. So thanks everyone for being here. Introductions have already been done. So we've got basically 3 questions that we're going to cover over 20 minutes. So we're going to try to make this fairly in-depth for each of the 3. We'll see if we can get to them all. So the first question, and we are going to go from my side all the way over to Peter at the end, is how does conversation design look at your org, and how do you function and work with other stakeholders?
Okay, I guess I'm first. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so conversation design. I currently run a team that runs part of Alexa domains, and generally we're conversation design, product, and engineering, like a little happy trio. And one of the things I'll talk about maybe a little bit later is kind of the balance between those 3, and that the traditional waterfall requirements coming from product, going to conversation design and UX design to engineering is so antiquated. Yeah. And that one thing that we do is we don't do waterfall in sprints, which is what I hear people do when they say they're doing agile. We do actual agile. So we're doing a lot of iteration. So we'll come and bring a prototype, or we'll bring a demo to the stakeholders, then we'll iterate, then we'll come eventually to a more final design. But then when we develop it, we might discover some things we didn't think about before, and so we'll do another iteration. So it's a very iterative process across product engineering and conversation design. And we use a lot of interesting tools like yours. But I think experiencing conversation design in the actual voice that it sounds like. So I work on the 1P Alexa, actually listening to what a customer sounds like interacting with Alexa is very different from looking at it on paper.
Totally. So for Ayesha, for those who don't know her, a bit of a mini celebrity in the space, has started 2 conversation design teams now. So one at Rocket, company's now at Instacart. Ayesha, I guess a bit of a different flavor for you here is when starting a new conversation design team from scratch, how do you work with stakeholders, and how does that grow over your time at the company?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's so interesting because in the conversation design space, I feel like every company is doing it a little bit different. So when I started my career at Rocket, I was on a cross-functional team, highly collaborative, moved really, really quickly. At Instacart, I'm leading a dedicated conversation design team, and so that has positives, right, where we're all focused on conversation design, we're speaking the same language, but we have to reach out and collaborate with, like you said, product and engineering, also marketing, ads, all of these other teams. And I think there are a lot of different ways to do that. I think a tool like Voiceflow, shameless plug, really helps us, speak that same language with engineers, or whether it's like marketers, so we're all looking at the same thing and we're all talking about the same thing. But also making sure that we are engaging the right people at the right time is super important, because I think the best conversational experiences are not only ones that are designed really well, but also ones that are highly, highly collaborative.
Yeah. So Gina at JPMC here, of course, being a financial institution, security and privacy is going to be one of the most paramount things that you actually have to think about when designing. How does the stakeholder sort of collaboration experience change when you're working with such a heightened level of security? And does that change based off, because you had a few other roles in conversation design as well?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because often security is first, right? And so conversation design often takes a back seat because security and privacy are super important. And so what we really try to do, my small and mighty team, what we try to do is keep that value of security while showing how our designs actually stay consistent with what the privacy rules are and security rules and things like that. And so we have to be very aware of our limitations for security. And so, we're often fighting for the value of conversation design with keeping that security in mind.
Totally. And then, so I think what's interesting about Peter at the end here as well is he's both an NLU designer as well as a conversation designer, likes to mix up the two. When you're collaborating between not only the conversation design team, but other stakeholders within the org as well, so for example, folks who work on NLU, how does that bridge take place? And essentially, how do you manage the workflow in a collaborative way where it's all still one assistant, you're not siloing each other, but each team is able to work independently?
Yeah, our team's like a platform team, so we have conversation designers, AI trainers, developers all within the one platform, POs, the whole thing. I think the main thing is like really, really good communication and at every stage, like making sure everyone understands what's happening. And I think that starts with a brief. So you have a really good brief, you scope everything out, you know what APIs you have, you know what the limitations of those APIs are. If the product owner really wants something that is out of scope, then you start looking at, okay, like how could we build this API or how could we do this thing? So yeah, that's kind of how we work.
Great. And so how does the role of conversation design, and this is sort of moving on to a second question here, how does the role of conversation design play within your org, and then how has it changed over time as well? Since obviously conversation design has really over the past 3-4 years started to mature as a space. We had VUI design, we had a few different branches of different design now merging under this one umbrella. How does conversation design play a role within your org? What are you responsible for? And ultimately, what's your goal? And so I guess, Lisa, starting with you.
Yeah, so when I started in dialogue design, so I actually started as a speech scientist. I don't know if anyone knows. So I have an electrical engineering degree, and I studied how the ASR works on the front end and the NLU. And how I became a designer is I kept looking at data. And that's something that I'm sure you all do as well. At Amazon, of course, our data is very locked down. But to the extent that we can, we're always looking at what customers are actually saying it and how they say it.
Yeah.
And what I found is the easiest way to improve an overall system was actually by rewriting or redesigning it, not by just tweaking recognition parameters, which is what I did as a speech scientist. So back then we called it dialogue design, then it was VUI design, now it's conversation design is sort of the standard term. And I think it's because a conversation isn't necessarily only voice. It includes chat. It also includes what we call nonverbal audio, like ear cons. So if you look at something like Astro, one of my good friends works on Astro, and there is a lot of responses that are not voice. Yeah. They're actually movement or sound. And so a conversation, if you think of a human conversation, is very multimodal. And so I consider conversation design kind of the umbrella that includes chat, voice, but also interacting with sound design and screen, right? So in person, if I wanted to show you something, I'd say, here, look at this, right? We do the same thing in an Echo show. So I say, here are your choices, or here are some of the results. You can use the screen as part of the interaction. So I would say conversation design is an interaction design with specialization on the conversation piece of it.
That's great.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. When I started my career, I was the only conversation designer on a team of data scientists and engineers. And prior to me joining, all of our content and our experience and even our visuals were written and designed by engineers, and they were really an afterthought. And what I've really learned is that content is super, super important in conversation design. Being able to user test, to talk to your users, to really research is super important. And I think that that's something that I'm really passionate about in the conversation design space, is bringing it in as early as possible and not as like an afterthought. And I think that really leads to better experiences.
So,
Just
I
real
think,
quick, Braden, I
yeah,
just
go
wanted
for
to
it.
add to that. So I started my career as a script writer for IVR applications. It was before conversation design was a thing. And one of the things that I think has stayed the same is the fight for legitimacy,
Yeah.
the fight for the fight that you're actually adding value, right? And because most of your stakeholders don't actually understand the value of conversational AI or conversation design. And I've worked in all places that were not their primary business was not focused on conversational AI. So something that's remained the same, I think, for me is consistently having that fight. And I got advice from a chief product officer at Chase who said to me, you need to be an agitator in this space, because this is not a conversational AI business, but you have an opportunity here to really make your mark. And so I sort of carry that with me, and I think it's really important. That's one thing in this like ever-changing industry, that's one thing that has remained the same, at least for me.
And I can see you doing that, absolutely, knowing you a little bit, is not waiting to be invited to have a seat at the table when it comes to the requirements, but actually inviting yourself.
You
and
have
I
to.
can't tell you how many meetings I've invited myself
You have to.
where I just show up.
You have to. For sure.
And you know, the fighting for legitimacy, I think there is how many times have you been given, oh, we kind of have the design already worked out, can you just make it sound good, right? How many
Right.
times? I hear
Right.
lots of laughter here.
Right.
So many times we've
Yeah.
gotten that. Can you just wordsmith this? No. Actually, you don't have the design worked out. You have kind of a demo-ish. So I think, yeah, you have to, depending on where you work, depending on which space you're in, you need to sort of force upon others that you are the leader and that you can own and drive that space.
Yeah, I think even at Chase, their design organization is very standard UX heavy organization. And talking about the difference between, you know, UX design for a mobile app and conversation design for an actual conversation are very different. And so even sort of explaining that to stakeholders and leadership, and that's a very real day-to-day sort of challenge. But that's what's exciting to me about the industry.
Totally. So my question for Peter here is, you know, you came into an existing sort of conversation design org, and you've really taken the reins and started to build up a sort of a standard practice within Woolies. How is that navigating different stakeholder groups, whether that's engineering or design, and how do you ultimately align folks on the value of conversation design so that you're able to, you know, basically just get things done, right, without having to face roadblocks? So how did you find that coming into an existing org versus building one from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm lucky in some sense that our conversation design team has been going for quite a while. It's been super successful for the business. So I don't really need to sell the legitimacy of conversation design. Like everyone's, this is going really well. This is saving us a heap of money. But I think where we had, I guess, tension early on was how we were designing. So there was lots of different designers before me. Everyone designed differently. Everyone's artifacts were different. So it was kind of hard when I came in. I'd look at someone's conversation design and be like, I don't know quite what that's saying. Then I'd look at another one and be like,
Yeah.
And then I think the biggest thing was, you know, starting to create this standardization of how we do things. You know, writing your style guides, your design practices, all those sorts of things, and getting that laid down. And similarly, when we were creating how we design, really involving the developers in that, because ultimately they're the main consumer of your design. So like, you shouldn't be designing for stakeholders necessarily. You should give a stakeholder a prototype. And then, you know, you're giving, like, the design is super, super clear to the developer what they have to build, because, you know, a developer doesn't want ambiguity. It's like, you know, if you're building a house and then you're like, yeah, I mean, the engineer, I think, said put the beam here, but like, whatever. Yeah.
I think one recurring theme that we hear from almost all folks we chat with in conversation design is that the lack of standards is what, and this is lack of standards at the team level, at the org level, and then even at the industry level, right? If you switch companies, it's almost like learning a new job over again, because it's like, hold up, a triangle at this company was this, and you know, we did this differently. So lack of standards is for sure something that we're, you know, even terminology, you know, slots, utterance, slots, entities, like, you know, there's quite a few terms for the same thing. So my last question is, I'm actually gonna make this a two-part. So one is, if you're a company that's looking to get into conversation design, or, you know, let's say you have an existing conversational AI company, a team, and you're looking to introduce conversation design, what is the value? Like, what should they actually be measuring to know that if their conversation design team was successful? So I think that's my first question. And then the second is, let's say you actually choose to then go ahead and do that. What are the skill sets you're looking for from a conversation designer? So if you're making that first hire or that 50th hire, what makes a good conversation designer? So two-parter, what is the value to the org of CXD? And then ultimately, what are you looking for? So Lisa, I'll pass to you.
So that's hard. You didn't tell me you were going to do a two-part question.
This was a secret two-parter.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was a one-part question. So showing the value, I actually came in to an organization that had gone for a little while without a designer. And so there was a great excitement. This was when I boomeranged to Amazon. And one of the things they noticed first is that it immediately sort of improved the communication between engineering and product to have the design person. But we ran a lot of A/B tests, to be honest, and showed that the designs that I wrote versus performing existing ones or proposed ones were data-wise superior.
That's amazing.
As in fewer turns, less friction, higher success rate, all that. So we have a great framework for A/B testing to see what is successful. We also have research, obviously, and run some usability tests. As someone who has also started a team and hired, I would say it is very hard, number one, to hire a good conversation design team, because it's not something that's taught in school. It's not like you can hire someone right out of RISD or your standard design school. There are very few places. Pratt, I know, has a course. UW has a course. But it's really such a blend of backgrounds, and we do a very rigorous sort of technical requirement as far as interviews go to actually see if someone who says they have conversation design on their resume actually has done it. But I have seen people successful from screenwriting backgrounds, English majors, drama, engineering like myself, and then linguistics. We do grab a lot of people out of linguistics programs because their understanding of language and how human conversation works. So I think looking for a wide range of skills, but also, for me, earning trust, so that's an Amazon leadership principle, but earns trust, someone who can communicate their design decisions clearly to stakeholders, someone who can negotiate and make compromises between teams. That is the skill that is hard to find, but when you find someone, and I can actually figure this out in interviews, it takes a while and you have to ask the right questions. But finding someone who you feel can sort of advocate for design, but is also open to and flexible to iteration and testing is really important. So that's sort of what I look for.
So rapid fire here. What is when you think about the value of a conversation design team, and then ultimately what's the number one trait you're looking to hire for? We'll go rapid fire here because I'm expecting Pete to come in with a cane any second. So.
And drag us off stage.
Ayesha.
I would probably say data literacy and the ability, you don't have to be an engineer, but you have to know how to talk to engineers. You don't have to be a product manager, you have to know how to talk to PMs, and that keeps going.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say you have to be that agitator that I talked about. You have to be resilient. You have to be able to compromise on your design sometimes because you might not have the final say, and you have to be okay with that. And then you have to continue to push on your next design and keep at it.
That's great.
Yeah, I think the thing, I would want to see someone be either really good at kind of NLU design, conversation design, or like writing responses and that sort of thing. Like I would want to see someone be at least really good at one of those things, and then be really keen to learn the rest of it. And also, I think not that they have to have some heap of background in design thinking, but be able to solve problems. And read a transcript and go, oh, okay, I can see right there they said whatever, and that would be an entity, or I would pull that value from there so that I could skip someone through a conversation quite quickly. And I think the next best thing to do is just get them to design a flow for you. You can see pretty quick whether they're going to be good or not if they design something.
Totally. So with that, that's our amazing panel. I do want to say one last thing. We are handing out tons of free swag, and there's also a social tonight where if you have any questions for our amazing panelists, they'll be present. They'll be handing out drink tickets, all that good stuff. So thank you so much to all of our panelists, and we hope to see you tonight. It's at 8 p.m.
Let's give it up. Let's give it up. Thank you so much, everybody. Fabulous.